If you have a pension you're relying on in retirement, then inflation is going to change how you need to plan for that pension in a major way. In today's video, I'll show you how. Hey everyone, I'm James Knoll, founder of Root Financial, and I'm here to show you how you can get the most out of life with your money. The high inflationary rate that we're facing right now is going to change the way you plan for retirement using pensions in two main ways. One way is the way that the lump sum value of that pension would be calculated. So if you have a pension and you can choose between collecting a lump sum versus an annuity, this inflation is going to impact that lump sum, and I'll walk you through how. The other way that it's going to impact your pension is if you're collecting the annuity. Well, this is going to be impacted because typically those annuities don't get adjusted for inflation. There's no cost of living adjustment, which means you're going to need to plan for how do you maintain your standard of living even though that pension benefit might remain flat. So in today's video, we'll cover both of those. Let's start by understanding how the lump sum equivalent is going to be impacted for those of you who are counting on that in retirement. And to do so, we need to understand the difference between a defined contribution plan and a defined benefit plan so you can start to see how rising rates and rising inflation is going to impact that. Well, a 401k or a 403b or any of those types of plans, those are what are called defined contribution plans. The IRS has this plan where it says you can contribute up to a defined contribution. So this year, for example, if you're 50 and older, you can contribute up to $50,000 per year. There's no guaranteed benefit at the end, but there's a defined contribution amount that you're allowed to make. Well, pensions are defined benefit plans. Defined benefit means there's some pension company that's investing funds for you to create some defined benefit in the future. So if based upon your years of service and your salary and a few other ways that your pension is calculated, the pension company might say you're eligible for $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month or $4,000 per month. Whatever it is, that's a defined benefit. And the pension company has to make sure there's a lump sum equivalent or a lump sum available to be able to generate that level of income. So let's see how rising rates impact this, because this is going to directly impact you in your retirement. So here's a breakdown of how this works. When you have a pension, there's the two options you can choose from. There's the annuity. This is what I was talking about. This is the defined benefit, so the DB, or you have the lump sum equivalent. So when you go to retire, your pension company might say, James, you can choose either $25,000 per year, or you can choose a $500,000 lump sum rollover. Which do you prefer? So let's take a look at an example of this. In this example, maybe I can choose between $25,000 per year, which is the defined benefit. This is the annuity that the pension company will guarantee for me as long as I live once I retire. Or they'll say I can take a lump sum of $500,000. Now this might be based upon, let's just assume interest rates being 5% per year. So I'm just going to use this as a starting point so you can see how this gets impacted as these rates start to rise. Well, we're in a high inflation rate right now. And what the Federal Reserve is doing is they're increasing interest rates to try to fight inflation. Well, as interest rates rise, here's the impact that's going to have on your pension. Let's assume rates are no longer 5%. Let's assume that they're 6%, as the actuaries are using these interest rates in their calculations. Well, when I now have these options, the annuity is going to stay the same, because remember, they have to pay me a defined benefit. The pension company is responsible for generating this defined benefit for me, regardless of what's happening. So if that's the option I'm choosing, I'm not impacted too much. I'm still collecting $25,000 per year. But if I want to take that lump sum instead, this will now be impacted, because here's how this works. To generate this $25,000 per year, this doesn't come from nowhere, and this doesn't come from nowhere. This $500,000 is a direct reflection or is a direct byproduct of this and this. So $25,000 per year, and I'm overly simplifying this, but $25,000 per year divided by 5% equals $500,000. That's where that number comes from. Well, let's see what happens when interest rates change, and now they're 6%. Well, in this example, the annuity benefit would still be the same. The pension as an annuity, as a defined benefit, it's still the same. But now, to get to the lump sum equivalent, I'm dividing by 6%. And what that gives me is a lump sum of $417,000. The pension company is looking at this to say, what's the equivalent here? Based upon what interest rates are, what lump sum could we give to James based upon his accrued years of services versus what pension, what annuity could we give to his James as his combined years of services if I was eligible for this pension? So what you start to see here is the way they calculate it based upon interest rates is as interest rates are rising, the lump sum equivalent is falling. So in this example here, what we have is we have a 1% increase in interest rates, and that equals a decrease of about 16.5% in the lump sum equivalent that I would be eligible for. So this is a major planning point for a lot of retirees, and I'm seeing people actually retire sooner than they otherwise would have because these adjustments typically happen at the end of the year or the very beginning of the next one. So they're looking at this and saying, well, maybe I was planning to work another year or two, but when I look at this and what's happening, if I work 1 or 2 more years, let's say I'm making $100,000 per year, well, that's an additional $100,000 to $200,000 of extra income I might bring in. But maybe I've had years and years and years of service at this company. So now my lump sum is up to maybe $1 million. And if inflation adjustments kick in, or if interest rate adjustments kick in, maybe that $1 million gets cut down to $800,000. Well, does it really make sense to work for 2 more years to earn $200,000 and have to do so by working 40 hours a week if by staying I'm losing $200,000 on the value of my pension? So this is the planning point that a lot of people have to consider is, does it make sense to make some changes based upon changing interest rates and how that might impact their lump sum rollover if that's the option they're going to elect? So some people might look at this and they say, oh, wow, that's too bad for the lump sum. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to take this benefit here, the same $25,000, because then I'm not impacted, right? Not necessarily. You are impacted, but in a different way, and let's explore that. Here's the way that you're going to be impacted if you take the annuity. And by the way, if you have a pension, it depends on, is this a government pension? Were you a police officer or an educator in the fire department? Those pensions have a cost of living adjustment built in, so that's not going to be as applicable to this here. But if you're receiving a pension from a private employer, typically that annuity has 0 cost of living adjustment built in. What you receive this year is the same as what you'll receive next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now, so on and so forth. And here's the serious planning point that needs to be considered with that. Let's say you're retired and here's your expenses and here's just years into retirement. Well, let's assume that you have expenses and those expenses are going to go up like this. Those expenses are increasing here with inflation. Well, you might have a pension that at the very beginning covers most of those expenses, but that pension is not receiving a cost of living adjustment. So the dollars are going less and less far each year is another way of saying that. Those dollars, even though they're remaining the same, the purchasing power is gradually diminishing. So this pension here, it starts off, and when it starts off, you see it covers almost all of your living expenses. Obviously, it depends upon your pension and expenses, et cetera, but what's happening is this gap is widening. Every year, your pension is covering less and less and less of what you actually want to be able to live on. Now, what happens if inflation kicks in? And these aren't your real living expenses, but what if expenses start to go like this because inflation's way higher? Well, now all of a sudden this gap is significantly wider. So yes, by taking that annuity, what you're doing is you're not impacted by the lump sum equivalent or the lump sum rollover amount, but you're more impacted if inflation stays elevated because now that gap is widening every single year between your pension amount and what it's actually going to cost to survive. Now, the way this actually impacts you will differ based on a number of variables, and let's go through that real quick right now so you can see the impact it will have on your plan. Here's how this might impact you depending upon how much your pension is, how much your expenses are, and what your other income sources are. Now, unfortunately, there's not a formula that's going to apply to everyone because it does apply in a few different variables, but let's take a look at 2 different examples here. Let's assume that you retire. And again, here's your expenses, and here's number of years into retirement. Well, if you retire today, and here's your retirement, let's assume that your expenses are $4,000 per month. So we'll put $4,000 here, and let's also assume that your pension is $4,000 per month. Well, your expenses are going to go up like this, but your pension that starts at $4,000 per month, it's going to remain at $4,000 per month indefinitely. So what you have is you have all of your needs met that first year of retirement, but as inflation continues to grow, there's a gap that's widening every single year. So if we look at the impact of this after 20 years here, what you'll see is that living expenses have now increased to $7,200 per month. If you have inflation of 3% per year for 20 years, that $4,000 per month has increased to $7,200 per month, but your pension is still sitting here at $4,000 per month. So in this example, you need to make sure you have other savings or investments or income sources to start bridging this gap here so that you don't start losing your purchasing power in these years here. That's one example. If all of your income is coming from your pension and your pension exactly matches your living expenses year one, but then starts to drift over time. Here's another example that might actually be a little bit more common though. Let's assume that you're retired and all the details are still the same. So you still have your expenses, you still have your years into retirement, and your living expenses still start at that $4,000 per month and increase over time. Now though, let's assume that your pension only represents $1,000 per month. So here's your pension, it's covering some, and the remaining amount is covered by Social Security. So the remaining $3,000 is covered by Social Security, and there is then a cost of living adjustment on this. So if Social Security is increasing by 3% per year, so let's assume with inflation, and your pension is increasing at 0% per year, so no cost of living adjustment, what you'll see here is there will start to be a little bit of a decline. There will start to be that gap that's widening over time. Here's actually the good news of this though. If we look at this, if you're looking at just a pure 3% inflation rate, you can see that after 20 years here, there's going to be a gap. But the gap's probably not as bad as you might think, because if we look here, Social Security after 20 years, the equivalent to $3,000 per month today is about $5,400 per month in 20 years, after again 3% cost of living adjustments. Your pension, again, started at $1,000 per month. It's still $1,000 per month, and we now have a total of $6,400 per month. The problem is expenses are $7,200 per month. So when you look at this, there appears to be a shortfall of $800 per month. That's not actually how it typically works in practice though. If you watch some other videos or listen to the podcast, what you've heard me say is that living expenses actually don't increase perfectly with inflation. You tend to have the go-go years up front where you're spending a lot more. Then you have the slow-go years in the middle where spending starts to decline a little bit. Then you might have the no-go years at the end where you're really not super mobile, but you do maybe have some medical expenses. And what happens is spending's high, but then starts to dip and then maybe gets high again. But on average, expenses increase by about 2% if inflation is 3%. So on average, living expenses actually increase by about 1% less than inflation does over time. So the good news here is while yes, there's a difference, or yes, there's a shortfall, when we're looking at this right here, this is if inflation grows at 3%. If that $4,000 per month only grew by 2% per year, which is maybe more in alignment with what actually tends to happen, then instead of needing $7,200 per month, you would actually need closer to about $5,950 per month. Now what you see here is the inflation adjusted income you do have is more than sufficient to cover those needs if your needs actually do increase by a little bit less than inflation. So the takeaway here is on the annuity side, there's no one size fits all formula that's going to tell you how is your pension going to be impacted by inflation. Really what you should be doing is at a minimum having some spreadsheet of what are your income sources and what are they going to be adjusted by for inflation, and compare that to your actual cost of living. Ideally, you have some financial planning software that's incorporating all this for you. So it's taking into account inflation, it's taking into account taxes, it's taking into account where income sources are coming from, so you can actually see what will be the net impact of inflation on your pension in retirement. So when we look at inflation today, it is directly impacting pensions in two major ways. One is it's impacting the lump sum that you might be eligible for. And two, it's impacting the spread between what your annuity might give you and what your actual cost of living is. If you're watching this video and you're trying to decide, how do I decide between the two? Should I take the lump sum? Should I take the annuity? Well, be sure to check out the video above so you can see when it makes sense to take the lump sum versus maybe when you should consider the annuity. Once again, I'm James Knoll, the founder of Root Financial. If you're interested in seeing how we help our clients at Root Financial get the most out of their life with their money, be sure to visit us at www.rootfinancialpartners.com.